Mutua was exonerated of any wrongdoing in a case in which he was accused of sexual harassment. As a result, he was awarded 9 million shillings in damages. The ruling spurred a lot of debate on whether the accusers in the case should face further charges for false testimony and whether this would be a deterrent for other cases of false allegations when it comes to sexual harassment. Well, tonight, my panel will discuss the legal options of an individual falsely accused of sexual harassment or rape and the impact on one's reputation as a result of such accusations. Let me introduce my panel really quickly. To my far right is Vivian Mwende, who is legal counsel at the Federation of Women Lawyers, or FIDA. Next to her is Felix Mutua, who is a partner and head of the Litigation and Dispute Resolution Department at Sichangi Partners Advocates, and also Tony Mutua's lawyer. And to my left is John Ngugi, Secretary of the Kenya National Association of Probation Officers, Nairobi branch. Last but not least is Miriam Washira, the country director for African Prison Project, as well as an advocate. Thank you all for coming in and joining me. Not a very easy topic to be discussing, but one that has gotten a lot of debate and attention, especially on social media. Felix, let me start with you, because you, of course, were litigating this particular case. And for those who are not familiar with the details, just kind of briefly take us through what you're dealing with when it came to your client, Tony Mutua.
Thank you, Vicky. Basically, what we were dealing with was an issue of civil defamation brought about by the fact that my client was defamed or was maliciously and falsely accused of having committed some offenses, sexual offenses. Right. Which, according to my client and according to what was brought to me, was not true. Mm-hmm. So the case generally was to basically compensate him for the reputation that he had suffered. His name was all over social media. You remember back then, his name was a trending topic, and that issue was discussed far and wide, I think worldwide, and therefore he was seeking compensation because he suffered loss and injury following that malicious accusation.
And oftentimes, unfortunately, when a case like this goes to the court of public opinion, social media particularly, someone is deemed guilty before proven innocent, and that can oftentimes have an implication on how the case is tried. Did you find that, that was a problem?
Not really, because for me, I believe in the wheels of justice in Kenya. There's a judicial system that works, and whatever happens online, I think has no influence on judicial decisions at the end of the day, because courts deal with evidence and the law.
Well, he won, and many people kind of seeing this as probably setting precedents in some way. Of course, you're happy. You litigated the case. What's your take on it once he got awarded that 9 million shillings?
No, I think it vindicated him as a person, and it should not be taken as something that now should scare people who have been sexually harassed or assaulted from reporting. I think that, as I've said, the judicial system in Kenya works. People should believe in it. Victims of sexual harassment should actually come forward, and this case should not stop you from doing that, because each case turns on its own facts.
And the reality is, maybe bring you in, Vivian, because women tend to be the ones who are the victims of such cases, and you sit on the other side of this in defending many of these kinds of cases. What would you say is the case for many of your clients when they come with a sexual harassment claim or even a rape claim as well?
Yes, thank you, Vicky. Thank you, Citizen. I'll start by commenting on sexual harassment and the number of times that it is reported. Let me state that it is rarely reported, especially in court, because most organizations have sexual harassment policy as is required by the law. And by the time it is coming to you as an advocate, probably the organization itself has not undertaken its proper measures to investigate or to probably hear this victim in this case. So you get this sexual harassment that is coming to you, and one of the things and the onus of proof is upon the victim. If you're claiming that the sexual harassment, if you're claiming rape has happened, then that means the burden of proof is upon you to prove with, beyond reasonable doubt that this actually happened. And most women, to be be honest with you, they don't have that evidence. At times they tell you, I tried, this is my employer, I do not have a video recording, I do not have a witness. Probably the witnesses are actually your colleagues. How many colleagues are willing to talk about their employer? So as you can see, most of these cases are not reported. As much as it is happening, it is happening. And I encourage every day that women should be reporting. Yes.
And for the ones that are reported, the ones that actually go to court, how many are successful?
Most are successful.
Most are successful?
Most are successful.
Even when it comes to the issue of evidence, because you said, you know, most would not want to testify in a court of law.
Yes, just like my colleague has said, Felix, the court, of course, is guided by the evidence that is presented by the prosecution. And let me say that sexual harassment can, this is that Tony chose the Employment and Labor Relations Court. You can report at both the Employment and Labor Relations Court, that is under the Employment Act, which provides for sexual harassment. You can as well report under the Sexual Offences Act without prejudice. So meaning one court will not rely what is happening to the other side. So the moment that the evidence is coming to this magistrate, they're going to charge. They're going to charge and check the investigation that is happening. They're going to see the prosecution's evidence that are going to present in court. If they are not guided, if they are not convinced, then of course this person is not going to be charged. It is upon the prosecution. Yes. And
I'm curious, what kind of evidence would be required, for instance, in a case where it's involving sexual harassment or even rape?
Rape, let me start by rape in this instant. It is provided for under Section 3 of the Sexual Offences Act. You need to show that there was no consent. You need to show that this person, the consent was forced. You need to show that this person, in fact, it was intentional and unlawful act, that you forced this person to have a forced penetration with you. That you need to show. If the prosecution is not going to show that, then we are going to have this person acquitted. In terms of sexual harassment, you need to give facts, you need to give evidence. The organization, which I believe that most people are actually doing, and as per the law, requiring the organizations to have a sexual harassment policy under Section 6, then they need to show that there is fact, there is evidence on this particular day, and I reported the first time, I reported the second time, this is what this person has been doing. Probably there are these text messages. Now that we're living in an era of social media, this person probably has been sending text messages in my Facebook account or in my Instagram page. If you do not show this, then the court is not going to be convinced. You can choose the Employment and Labor Relations Court. You can be awarded damages. But in terms of the sexual harassment, then this person is going to be charged with not less than 3 years imprisonment and not less than 100,000 in fine. Yes.
And let's talk about now the other side of it, imprisonment. And John and Miriam, you deal very closely when it comes to this. You know, John, when you come across some of these individuals, and when I say some, I'll talk about many of the young men who are caught up in such allegations, do not have the resources to defend themselves in a court of law. Many times are innocent, but they have no way of showing it, and then find themselves behind bars. You know, just take us through some of the scenarios that you have encountered.
Well, you have, thank you, Vicky, and thank you, Citizen. We have to look at what we do in probation from a different perspective than what the lawyers and the prosecution will do in such cases, because our role really is to assist the court to get information that may not be forthcoming in the contest between the advocates and the prosecution. So in such cases, when the accused person comes to court and is charged, most of the time when they are not able to express themselves, and therefore they are denied bail, or they cannot afford the bail that is set, or they cannot be able to access their loved ones. So at times the courts will ask the probation officers to actually get this information from them. And it's at that moment where the probation officers then come into contact with a person who has emotional turmoil, somebody who is in confusion, somebody who is not with himself. So at that moment, then the probation officer has got to listen in. So they act as a people that will be able to be a buffer for this person, because this person has been through accusations, and maybe falsely, because it's not yet been proven, they've not been able to express themselves to anyone. So when the probation officers are taking in the information from them, then they also act as counselors, I would say, people that offer psychosocial support to them, so that they're able to guide them through in terms of what options they would have, what people to call for them to be able to afford. Maybe mostly we deal with them at this moment in terms of bail assessment, because once before they are proven guilty, then our engagement is on bail when the court refer them to us. Yes.
Okay.
So how we help, how we come in is on that level where someone has been accused, they may not have been in touch with any of their relatives, and the bail has been set so high, they may not even know how to go about raising the bail terms. So when they work with the probation officers, and the probation officers are able to help them navigate through that confusion. Yeah.
And you know, Miriam, I have to ask you this. When dealing with such cases, what scenarios do they tell you they found themselves in that they now became a victim of a false accusation?
Thank you, Victoria. Most of the time, the false accusation are not by strangers. So it's people that you have relationship with. They are either family members, because there must be a motive behind the false accusations. So sometimes it's a relationship gone fall, where they will go now and say he raped me, and yet it's their relationship that has broken down. Sometimes it's just a family feud that has arisen, and somebody decides, I'm going to fix you. So they decide. I think a few months ago we had a case trending where a girl came forward saying that the mother asked her to accuse the father. That's
right, it aired right here on Citizen.
Yes. Yeah. So you see, in most of the times, it's a person that you're related to, and there must be a motive behind it.
Right, yes. Right. And what are the options for individuals like this? Because not everyone's going to have that fortune of someone coming forward and saying, I lied. You know.
I think one, it's having a very good defense counsel. And unfortunately in our country, that is a rare thing, especially for most people. So it's your defense counsel that will be able to counter the evidence being brought and punch holes on it. Because when it comes to criminal matters, we say you must prove beyond a reasonable doubt. If it's a false accusation, there must be something that is not adding up. So if you are able to create that doubt in the judges or the magistrate's mind, then you get away with it. But sometimes you find that when it is well planned, because sometimes it's very well planned, you are set up, things are set up, and you find yourself in that position. And it's very unfortunate that there are people who are serving prison sentences and yet they are falsely accused.
Right. And you know, Felix, let me bring you in, because a lot of people, you know, on social media were asking, okay, you know, he got the award for 9 million shillings, he's been exonerated, but 5 years of his life have passed with many people thinking that he did it. You know, and there's a cost to his reputation. That's the case for so many people. Just take us through what he had to deal with, even in terms of maybe getting opportunities or jobs, but you know, on the flip side, they're thinking, aren't you on the chopping block for this?
Vicky, from what I've seen in this matter that has ended, from the time that was, I think that was in 2014 when it started, to date, I think Tony as a person, he has really suffered, because I remember the Tony we knew back then and the Tony we know now. As in, it is the name that he had created is not the same name that is there today. And you will note that during that period, you will see he had sponsors who actually left him. He had some scholarships which actually ended, and that was because of this social media campaign that was done. And you'll see people were posting, and there was that hashtag Stop Tony Muchama, and the employers were tagged in those posts, and they were being asked, what are you doing about sex molesters in your employment? What are you doing? What is your policy on sponsoring rapists? You see, and when you go and search Tony Muchama, during all that period, when you search Tony Muchama, the first thing that comes is rep, Muchama and rep. Now, as a potential employer, as a potential sponsor, as a potential client, in this age of social media, the first thing you do is usually search a person online. If I'm going to engage you, Vicky, I'll just go to the internet to type Vicky, and something will come up. Right. When you typed Muchama, the first thing that came up was rep. Now, no one wanted to deal with him, and that he has suffered. And in fact, as you can say, money cannot really compensate you for reputation, because once it has gone down, even if you are awarded a big sum, but at the end of the day, what you have lost for the 5 years, you can never get it back.
No, absolutely. Yes. And you know, Vivian, on the other side of this, people are also saying, you know, does this mean that less and less women will be believed? You know, because some will fear, if I don't have enough evidence to stand up in court, I'll be questioned even further on my credibility. From where you sit, what do you make of such a judgment on the fact that some women may be discouraged from reporting?
Let me start by talking about, there's a section that was deleted in 2022 by number 2, miscellaneous number 2 of 2012, that deleted section 38 of the Sexual Offences Act. What section 38 said is that anyone who brings false allegations under any offense in this act, being the Sexual Offences Act, is liable to the same fine, is liable to the same imprisonment as that person. Just in case you are reporting maybe someone who is under rape, then that means that we are talking about 10 years to a possible extension to life. So that was deleted. Why? Because most women were not talking about it. So now, as advocates, we are asked now to rely with Section 129 of the Penal Code, which just talks about making false information to the public officers. Women were given that opportunity to talk about the sexual offenses that is coming out. What I may say is that now, even more than ever, women are really constrained. They are really constrained to making the allegations, because right now, whatever that you're going to say, you're going to be judged. You really need to bring the facts. But again, the leeway that was provided now, that anyone can bring it. That is why there's danger in bringing something that is a false accusation, because what withheld me at that time, that withheld me that time not to talk about it, now I'm willing to talk about it, because either way, I'm not supposed to suffer. I cannot suffer with that person the same probably imprisonment they could have gotten. Yes. So
even with that clause removed, as we speak, is there any repercussions for a false accusation under that particular?
Yes, under Section 129, any time that you tried, under Section 129 of the Penal Code, if you bring false accusation against a person, you are charged and you are imprisoned in court. But what I must say is this, that you must show that at the time that you are making the false accusations, that you are not aware that this what I'm making is false accusation, then you're going to be acquitted. You need to show that I was not aware. I'm sure that the end result, and it seems the end result is to show that actually this was false, but at the time that this was happening, it was not a false accusation, then you're going to be acquitted. If you show that you actually knew about what you're making to be false, you led the police to start investigating things that was not right, you led the public to think that this person actually did rape to me, then that you're going to be convicted for sure.
Right.
Yes.
And you know, Felix, many are wondering how, when it comes to recovering now that 9 million, how does that even happen? Especially if the person who's been asked to, unless they're giving over assets and whatnot, how does that actually happen?
Well, there are various ways of executing a court judgment. One is you can always attach. One is they can actually pay. Yeah, if they have the capacity, they can actually pay. The other way is you can actually attach their properties. If they have households, they have cars, they have a land somewhere, if you know about them, you can attach that. You can also garnish their accounts. If you know about their bank accounts, and you can actually, you know there's money in those accounts, you can actually attach that. There's also the last one, which is you can have someone taken in for civil jail if they're unable to pay. So yes, there are various modes within which you can execute that judgment.
Yes, John, you wanted to say something.
I wanted to say something in connection with believing, whether women are going to be believed more in this era, or in following this judgment, and just bring in the issue of the other victims of sexual offenses who are minors. You know, not only the women who actually report cases, but also we have also other cases that involve minors. And those are cases that also have got to be dealt with in terms of the law and the evidence that the prosecution are going to adduce. So it's in terms of, if not so much about believing, but so much about the evidence that the prosecution can be able to bring across as far as the cases, the sexual offenses cases are concerned. And more so, we should not also lose the fact that apart from just the litigation, there's also a lot of suffering that goes on silently, what you have observed with the minors, because unlike the women who can be able to come out and be able to speak for themselves, in most cases minors are just so much traumatized. There's so much they cannot be able to express themselves, and therefore the issue of the prosecution being able to prosecute the cases successfully still remains very valid, because it's not just the women who can be victims of sexual offenses, but also you have the minors, the girls, and also the boys going through the same. And therefore, I would like to the viewers to see that it's not only the women who can be victims and who should be believed, but also we should also consider the minors. And the fact that it is evidence that the prosecution will use that will make the court determine whether the person is guilty or not. So
what are the options? Because, you just mentioned a very, very important category. A 5-year-old is defiled and, they don't even know what happened to even begin to explain what happens in those kinds of cases to ensure that they get justice.
In those cases, the first point of intervention has been, from our point of view, the support to the victim. The psychosocial support to the victim. That is usually the first thing that one would want to think about. And therefore you'll find that the courts actually considering probation officers to actually ask them before even grant bail, what is the victim impact in this case? What is the impact of this on this issue on the victim, and in this case the minor? And therefore you'll find the probation officers going out of their way to actually be able to assess how much has this minor suffered, what is the psychosocial impact of the same, and therefore document that to the court, so that the court can now be able to make a decision mostly on bail, but also can be also be able to make a decision about how does that victim get supported, psychosocial support, so that that victim is not left without being supported. So that is how then probation, we find ourselves being so relevant to the courts, because the courts now are able to get the information that within the prosecution and the advocate may not come out clearly. But when then the probation officers are called upon to actually give that information to the court, and then the court is able to make a good decision on that. So the option is for the victim to be listened to, to be supported, and for the victims not to be ignored in as the accused person try to exonerate themselves from the same.
No, absolutely. And let me come to you, Miriam, because as much as we're hearing, your fellow advocates saying that, the court of law will be able to try this fairly and just, there's oftentimes this notion that if a man is standing before a judge on rape and sexual harassment charges, it will be skewed to favor the woman or to believe the woman. And he feels, I'm already deemed guilty. How do you debunk that kind of thinking?
I think it's not always the case. I think once a case starts in court, the judge and the magistrate would want to think from a clean slate that this case has been brought to me. What is the evidence that is there? So the magistrate and the judge will be guided by the evidence, not the preconceived notions that they have. So if you're an accused person and you know that a judge who has come clearly saying that every time a woman comes before me, I believe her first, then you can go and say he needs to recuse himself because he already has preconceived notions. So it is about the evidence that will be brought by the prosecution. Maybe to note that it's not always that if you do not get a conviction that it was a false accusation. I think we need to make that clear. What matters, and especially in a criminal case, the standard of proving is very high. So sometimes it could have happened, but because the evidence was not corrected properly, it was not presented well, you get somebody being acquitted. In that case, it's not always that you'll go now to civil, just in case everybody now is thinking, I'm going to civil court. It's a matter of showing that there was actually now motive, ill motive behind the case. So currently, we do not have so many where you will go and say false accusation, because in Tony's case, he was awarded for defamation. It was not that he went for the false prosecution. I think we need to make that clear. So it's a matter of what evidence is being brought, and the judge should think and apply the evidence, the facts, and the law as it is, not the preconceived notions.
If it was on that false accusation, do you think you would have gotten that 9 million? Felix?
Vicky, for false accusation, that falls under the penal code. And for that, you're normally not awarded.
Okay.
Actually, the person once convicted is fined, and the fine goes to the government. So it does not go to the victim. Yes.
And I see someone here on Twitter asking, if Tony Washama was found guilty of the act's alleged sexual harassment, what would be the penalty? My take, the court should just transfer the penalties onto the false accusers. Simple. What's your response to that?
No, you see, these are two different systems. Under the criminal law, as she said, the burden of proof is one beyond reasonable doubt. In civil cases, it is on a balance of probabilities. So you cannot use what was in the civil case for the criminal, because the burden is totally different. Yes.
And, you know, at the end of this, someone is saying, if I'm accused falsely, jailed for a period of time, later the truth is out and I'm freed, will I be compensated for false accusations and life in jail? If I'm figuring that's the person who makes a false accusation. But what happens if, for instance, the story that we ran of that gentleman who, you know, was jailed, later on they find out that it was actually false, what happened? What happens to him? What are his options?
I think in our current law, we do not have provided for. It's not very direct. I know recently there was a case in US where 5 boys were imprisoned, and later on somebody came and confessed that actually I'm the one who committed the crime. And they were awarded by the court for the time they spent in prison. But currently in our laws, we do not have that precedence. And I don't know whether any court will be willing to set it, because then it would open up a very big loophole in our system.
And a Pandora's box, I'm sure, when it comes to such cases. And that brings this conversation to a close. I know we have a lot more that we could have discussed. Unfortunately, time is not on our side. Thank you so much to Miriam and John, Vivian and Felix for your time. And hopefully this brings a bit more clarity when it comes to this particular issue. A lot of armchair analysts on social media trying to give their judgments on such issues. But until next week, have a wonderful evening. I'll see you again tomorrow on a Sunday Live. Have a good night.